day, Madam.
I am Priscilla G. Caminade.
And I am Jasper J. Giaro. And for today's video, we'll be talking about an analysis of The Raven written by Alan Edgar Poe. Morning, Christy.
Morning, Jay.
Well, it's good to see you again.
Yeah, it's good to see you too again.
But have you heard about the poem of Alan Edgar Poe, which is entitled The Raven?
Oh yeah, I read it yesterday and I really love it. I'm here. How about you? Did you read that?
Yes, I've already read it and I've learned also many things. And one of the reasons I read it because it was very famous and it was a poem that it's so very unique. The style was unique.
Yes, I really love it. So can you give me one theme that you learned from that poem?
Well, the one of the theme that I have noticed that was in the poem was madness and despair.
Can you share us something about the theme?
Yes, I just read it yesterday, and I also learned from it. Did you know that madness and despair is the first theme that is present in the poem? The Raven is especially a poetical study of despair, with the narrator drifting further and further off from reasonable thought because the poem unfolds. From the start of the poem, the bust of Athena, the goddess of wisdom, looks down on him, symbolizing rational thought which is ultimately overcome by paralytic fear and lost embodied within the dark stoic figure of the Raven. At first, the narrator convinces himself that he is not being haunted by Leonore when he opens the door to his chamber and finds nobody there. He attempts to form sense of the knocking sound and also the bird's presence and speech, with each response of nevermore. The narrator becomes increasingly angry as he continues to probe the bird. His reasoning begins to fail, and as he becomes desperate, he seeks a different solution. The speaker is the one who adds context to all the raven's responses. The bird simply says one word, but the narrator ascribes progressively nonsensical meaning to it. When the raven's final nevermore dashes his hopes, he succumbs to his uncontrolled misery as sadness has gone to madness.
You are at point with that, Jay, and I would just like to add something about the theme that emerged. You know, what you mentioned, the madness and despair. So in connection to that, grief also is present, as what I have observed. Because based from the background of the author, I can see that there are some connection between the speaker and the author, which is Poe, who at that moment lost his wife at an early stage. So another point is that the poem shows how someone's grief can overcome the ability to live beautifully in the present time and engage in the society because of their constant thinking of their loved ones and their past. This is what happened to the poem, where even though the speaker tried his best to convince himself that he should forget his past and not to grieve, the raven's action of refraining takes him back into the reality of him being lost and alone, taking him out of his present time and dwell back into the past. So his grief caused him to shut himself out of the real world from the reality which in true life affects the disposition of an individual. But you know, we cannot stop someone who is sad and had lost someone to feel alone and grief because it is a natural human's reaction and emotion. But at the end of the day, what is important is that they must not dwell themselves forever to these emotions because life is short and death is just part of it. Move on, but never forget the memories of your loved ones. Yes, they died, but the memories you built together will keep as your company and your comfort.
Yes, but furthermore, another theme is the death and afterlife. The Raven speaker is alone in his room, a room and a chair where his beloved Leonore once sat, and is lost in his thoughts, finding solace in remembering and reading. He pores over lost lore in an attempt to bring Leonore back from the dead in memory, hoping to alleviate the grief of her lost wife. When the narrator mentions the night's Plutonian shore, he associates the presence of the raven with the death, as Pluto was the Roman god of the underworld and overseer of the afterlife. Associating the raven with Pluto implies what the bird sends a message from beyond, and he will be reunited with the with Leonore in the hereafter.
That's good, Jay. I love your point. And you also know that the poem also emphasizes the narrator's situation of hopelessness, of not being reunited again with his wife, either by spiritually or physically. So the narrator tries to comfort himself from grief, but later on realized it will never pass by, leaving him without relief of hope. As mentioned in the poem, he first hoped that his wife to come back when he hears the tapping in the door. He hopes to welcome his wife again, but as he opens the door, darkness welcomes him. So the raven's repetition of nevermore emphasizes the realization of losing his wife physically, as he only hears his voice echo back into the darkness. So next is the bird's appearance for the narrator's sign as symbolism to forget and find relief in forgetting. But yet again, as he tries to distract himself by reading and failed, the word nevermore washes his hope again. So lastly, when the narrator asked the raven if he could see his wife again, in which the raven rejects and responses nevermore, made him realize how he cannot change his situation and simply vanishes his hope away. The narrator uses the raven's single word to reflect his emotional state and affects his life. He asked an established question to the raven when in fact they could have possibly seen each other again after life. He made himself put in a situation where only receive an answer which dooms him to have an endless sorrow and emphasizes his creation of his own hopelessness.
Yes, you're very correct, Miss Christie. It is very true, but also the poem depicts how the narrator loses hope in seeing again his life, but in reality, we should not easily give up and lose hope because what others said to us. This poem of Alan Edgar Poe is a timeless piece of literature and contains a lifelong lesson of not letting someone by the other persons of another raven into your life. It affects and dictates the flow of your situation, and do not let someone as a raven lose your appreciation of your present life and put your hope down. Do not let their words affect you. Instead, use it to continue living. Also, do not be discouraged when you feel mad and grief because it is natural response towards death. What matters is that do not let this emotion ruin your future and affect your life
It is
forever.
very interesting to look back at someone like Edgar Allan Poe, whose writing, while much more subtle than we are used to, is still capable of sending chills down your spine. And I noticed that when the raven enters and utters the ominous word nevermore, it hangs in the reader's mind, emphasizing and exaggerating how this word was repeatedly spoken by the raven slowly because its way through the speaker's mind, driving him to the brink of insanity. So what starts out as a story of a talking raven quickly spirals into a story of a man descending into his own personal hell. I find out the man is trying to bury his sorrow due to the loss of a loved woman named Leonore. We don't know who she is or what happened to her. All we know is that this man is desperately trying to relieve the pain of losing her. He starts to have hallucinations about Leonore and longingly remembers her aspirants on the velvet cushions. Little weird, but we all take heartbreak a little differently. And most of us probably know the feeling of watching horror movies and having the creak of the house set our nerves on edge. That seems to be what is happening to the speaker here.
Yes, it was indeed a very unique poem. But then there is a rapping at the door. This could represent a great many things. And first off, it is the unknown. It is the introduction of the stranger. The stranger is not a person, but rather a category of experience. It is the introduction of anomaly and uncertainty, which shakes up the status quo. The stranger fills up with both hope and dread. It can inspire us, to shower us with gifts, or he can kill us. So in this case, The tapping on the door appears to be a disruption of the serene state within man's comfortable chamber. It perfectly sets the mood for this dark and brooding poem of a man's alone in his room or alone in his mind, with nothing to occupy him but his own disturbing thoughts and memories. The speaker keeps posing more and more serious questions to the raven, but the man already knows the answer of each question, yet still he holds on the hope that the raven will tell him something different. But soon, as he digs deeper, the answer will begin to peck and pry uncomfortably at his mind, asking the thing he most longs for, to see his lost love, which is Lenore, will never come back. The speaker blaming all his pain and sorrow on the presence of the raven, and shrieks for it to go, but the raven refuses. The raven now appears to be a dark fragment within the man's soul, and something he is completely incapable of escaping. No matter how hard he tries to vanish them, the ravens of our own thoughts and memories will forever remain as our constant companions.
Wow, I really love your idea about your analysis about the theme, and I'm very proud that you learned something aside from what I've learned.
Because yes, I was also having the mature understanding of what you feel about the poem, and I learned a lot of the poem, which, as you can see, the poem was very unique. It was different from other poems that you will read on other authors, but Alan Edgar Poe really did a great job in writing the Raven.
Yes, and I hope someday that we can again share our knowledge or our insights about another poem of Edgar Allan Poe.
Yes, very
I'm
good.
looking forward to
I'm
that.
looking forward to that. And
Yes.
I hope that we will come back here soon and tell also another story. Thank you for your time of having me as your partner for this conversation.